Chinese health authorities are welding people's doors shut. They're locking citizens' doors with steel chains and lining hallways with barbed wire. But what's behind the extreme actions? The tactics seek to block people from leaving their homes, just one aspect of China's strict virus prevention and control strategy. It's known as Beijing's zero COVID policy, an effort to completely eliminate the virus from inside Chinese borders, and has been in place since the beginning of the first outbreak. In this week's special report, we examine some of China's draconian pandemic measures and look at what Beijing's policy really means for its citizens. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. China's zero COVID-19 strategy is starting to look a little far-fetched. That's as countries around the world show signs of accepting the idea of coexisting with the virus, as they start to reopen and ease pandemic prevention and control measures. In the U.S., New York's famous Times Square is reopening for its annual New Year's Eve celebration. And on the other side of the world, New Zealand plans to open the borders of its largest city next month. Melbourne, Australia also eased its longest lockdown last month. After the stroke of midnight, residents flocked to pubs and bars in the city as they celebrated the relaxing of pandemic measures. In contrast, the atmosphere in China remains tense in many provinces. That's because a strict COVID elimination policy is still in effect and has been since the pandemic first began. And by the looks of it, Chinese authorities are dead serious about getting to zero virus cases. In this week's special report, we take a look at what the zero COVID policy looks like in action. Just how harsh the measures get under the communist regime, and whether, in Chinese authorities' eyes, all ends justify the means. One of those means is forced quarantine. It's a common virus prevention and control measure in Chinese health authorities' playbook. Though forced quarantine in this case is very different from what other countries call mandatory quarantine. Forced quarantine often plays out like this: a group of health workers violently dragging people away from their homes to a quarantine site. And it's not a pretty sight. The process usually features brutality and distressing wails from those getting dragged away. Looking at the lengths these health workers have gone to, it's reasonable to assume that those being taken away must be infected or otherwise pose great risk to their community. But that's not often the case. Many of them are healthy, but may have come into contact with someone carrying the virus. Even if they're not infected, there's really no way to escape health authorities' radar once they deem someone a threat. In one case, a resident locked his door to try to keep the workers out. Undeterred, they used a crowbar-like instrument to pry his door open. This level of virus control is rarely seen outside China, and sometimes the extreme strategies get violent. In one case, a struggle between residents and health workers reportedly became so rough that one woman's neck was accidentally broken during the bout. For many, it may be hard to imagine the reasoning behind such aggressive methods. Do these actions stem from an extraordinary level of care Chinese authorities have for citizens' well-being? Based on this next clip, that doesn't seem to be the case. The video shows a woman holding her sick child in her arms inside a hospital, kneeling on the ground and crying for help. According to newspaper The Epoch Times, the mother had run out of money and was begging the hospital to treat her daughter. But from the looks of it, no one came to help. The apparent contradiction is raising questions. On one hand, health authorities are forcing people to quarantine, violently in some cases. And on the other, health workers seemingly ignore a sick little girl in need of treatment. To watch today's full special report, click the link in the description down below. We are working with Epoch TV, and all special reports are published there in full length. Taiwan will soon have a chance to present itself in the international community as a standalone entity, as Taiwan, and not as part of China. The U.S. invited Taiwan to its Summit for Democracy next month. And Beijing is warning Washington not to play with fire. Emma McCarthy reports.
In a move that's infuriated China, the Biden administration has invited Taiwan to its Summit for Democracy next month, according to a list of participants published on Tuesday. The first of its kind gathering is a test of President Biden's assertion, announced in his first foreign policy address in office in February, that he would return the United States to global leadership to face down authoritarian forces led by China and Russia. There are 110 participants on the State Department's invitation list for the virtual event, which aims to help stop democratic backsliding and the erosion of rights and freedoms worldwide. China and Russia are notably absent. Taiwan's foreign ministry said the government would be represented by its digital minister and Taiwan's de facto ambassador in Washington. China's foreign ministry said it was firmly opposed to the invite. Sharp differences over democratically governed Taiwan, which China considers its own territory, persisted during a virtual meeting earlier this month between Biden and Xi Jinping. The White House said that while Biden reiterated long-standing US support for the One China policy, he said he strongly opposes unilateral efforts to change the status quo or undermine peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait.
China's foreign ministry said Wednesday that the regime firmly opposes the United States inviting Taiwan to its Summit for Democracy. That's because, the spokesman said, Taiwan is an inalienable part of Chinese territory. He also warned the U.S. not to play with fire, saying the U.S. would eventually catch fire itself. A joke went wrong. How long will the Chinese Communist Party last with all the crisis and tensions? JPMorgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon quipped that it likely wouldn't outlive his bank.
I made a joke the other day that I was just in Hong Kong that I made a joke that the Communist Party is celebrating its 100th year. So is JPMorgan. And I'll make you bet we last longer. I can't say that in China. They probably are listening anyway.
Dimon made the claim on Tuesday in a college panel discussion about the bank's China business. JPMorgan has been operating in China since 1921, the same year the Communist Party was founded there. This year, both JPMorgan and the CCP are celebrating their 100th anniversary. But will China see the funny side? Probably not. On Wednesday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry condemned the comment, saying, "Is it really necessary?" And Dimon backtracked. In a statement from the bank the same day, he said he regretted his remark. How did Dimon view China in the past? He once said, "China is one of the world's biggest opportunities." JPMorgan's China business is valued at nearly $20 billion. This is only a tiny part of the bank's balance sheet of nearly $3.8 trillion. But the bank is planning to expand further in China. Earlier this year, JPMorgan became the first foreign investment bank to fully own a security venture. Before that, all foreign financial institutions were required to have a Chinese partner. JPMorgan is known to have close ties with the ruling party in China, especially through its Sons and Daughters program. Between 2006 and 2013, JPMorgan hired about 100 interns and full-time employees with special backgrounds. Most of them were sons and daughters of Chinese high-level officials. Most of them were unqualified, but it was an important part of the bank's efforts to build relationships in China and win lucrative business. U.S. authorities described the program as corruption, plain and simple, and said it was corruptly influencing government officials. In 2016, JPMorgan got a $264 million fine. Beijing's cover-up of a domestic scandal is backfiring. The international community is in uproar after a Chinese tennis star disappeared. She had just accused a senior Chinese official of sexual assault when she went missing. And now a former U.S. senator and a women's legislative caucus weighs in.
China's communist regime is known for handling controversy quietly, but this time it could be losing control. That's after Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai publicly accused a top Chinese official of sexual assault earlier this month. She disappeared from the public eye soon after.
It's especially troubling and I think very frightening when the charge is leveled against a top Chinese official, a top government official. It becomes very difficult.
Romero is a former senator and author of a recently released book, Just Not That Likeable, The Price Women Pay for Gender Bias. Posting the allegation on a Chinese social media platform, Peng accused Zhang Gaoli and his wife of forcing her to sleep with him. But her initial post was quickly removed. Zhang once served as a vice premier for China's communist ruling body. The accusation is unprecedented in the history of communist China.
I give, first of all, a great deal of credit to her for having had the courage in the first place to level the charge.
About 2 weeks later, the women's tennis organization said in a statement it was unable to reach Peng after multiple attempts. And 3 days later, a Chinese state-owned media outlet published a screenshot of an email Peng purportedly sent to WTA. In it, she claimed the accusation wasn't true, that she wasn't missing, and that she was safe. The media later released photos of Peng smiling and posing with the cat.
What if LeBron James, a man, a very powerful, top-notch basketball player who does a lot of business in China, what if he filed claims of sexual harassment or sexual misconduct? And what if he suddenly went missing? I will guarantee you that the National Basketball Association, elected officials around our country, around the world, would be stepping up to say, where is LeBron James? And we wouldn't accept pictures of LeBron James sitting with a cat and at a little school with children just to say everything's okay. We need to hear from her directly and support her needs and her safety at this time.
China's foreign ministry had, until recently, continually maintained it was not aware of Peng's situation. But after her disappearance sparked international outcry, the ministry changed its tune, saying the controversy was, quote, maliciously hyped up and should not be politicized.
It's not the first, but it's amongst the first in China. And from a very powerful woman who has a voice, has an international presence, when she speaks up and the world begins to listen and women around the world begin to demand answers, that's not politicizing.
The international community has since applied pressure on Beijing. Several women's tennis players commented on Twitter, demanding proof of Peng's safety and an investigation into her allegation. U.S. President Biden also asked for verifiable proof of Peng's well-being last week, while the Women's Tennis Association says it's willing to pull out of China if Peng's case isn't investigated.
As long as her voice isn't being heard, as long as her claim of Me Too and sexual assault is not respected, then we should not be spending $1 supporting governmental officials who appear to be trying to cover this up.
Peng reappeared in public over the weekend, but so far, Chinese authorities have censored Peng's allegations and her online presence. Many says the concerns aren't going away.
The European Union is joining the efforts backing Peng Shuai. The bloc spokeswoman on foreign affairs told the South China Morning Post that the EU asked China for independent and verifiable proof of Peng's well-being and whereabouts. The spokesperson said the videos and photographs of Peng from the weekend cannot allay their worries about the tennis star. There are almost 30 countries in the European Union. The U.S. government blacklisted a dozen Chinese companies today. It's the latest U.S. action on Chinese companies as tensions grow between Beijing and Washington over the status of Taiwan and trade issues. The list includes 12 Chinese firms in electronics, semiconductors, aerospace, and quantum computing. According to the Commerce Department, some of them are involved in the Chinese military's quantum computing efforts. Some others are contributing to Pakistan's nuclear activities or ballistic missile program. 15 other firms from Japan, Singapore, and Pakistan also made the list. For these companies, if any American companies wants to sell to them, they'll need to apply for a license, which will likely be denied. Italy's Prime Minister Mario Draghi has vetoed a Chinese company's takeover attempt in the country. This is the third time since his government took office in February. That's according to a Hong Kong filing by the rebuffed group, Zhejiang Jingshen Mechanical. The government was concerned a takeover of applied materials screen printing equipment business in Italy could have had consequences in the semiconductor sector. Italy reserves the right to use anti-takeover legislation to ward off undesired bids in industries deemed of strategic importance. Rome has stopped foreign interests in Italy 5 times since 2012, when its laws gave its government the power to do so. 4 of those episodes turned away Chinese bids. And over to another European country, living conditions at the site of construction of a Chinese-run tire factory in Serbia are raising concerns for human rights groups. Workers building the factory allegedly live in cold dormitories. They have no warm water and there's not enough food. Some human rights groups have warned that the workers could be victims of human trafficking or even slavery. Joy Dogood has more.
This site in northern Serbia is where some 500 workers are allegedly living in harsh conditions. Vietnamese workers are helping to build the first Chinese car tyre factory in Europe. They say they're living in barracks without heat or sufficient amounts of food.
Because they have a big problem. No electric, no water and no salary.
About 100 of Nguyen Van Chi's fellow workers who live in the same barracks have gone on strike to protest their plight. Some of them have been fired because of this. It has caught the attention of human rights groups in Serbia, which have warned that the workers could be victims of human trafficking or even slavery.
We are witnessing the breach of human rights right now because the Vietnamese workers are living in terrible conditions. Their passports and their identification cards are being taken by the Chinese employers. They've been here since May of this year, and they received only one salary.
The factory owner, Shandong Linglong Tire Company, denied to Serbian media that the company is responsible for the workers. It said it did not employ them directly and blamed their situation on subcontractors and job agencies in Vietnam. The company also denied that the workers were living in poor conditions and promised to return their documents. Serbia is a key spot for China's expansion. Chinese banks have granted billions of pounds in loans to Serbia to finance Chinese companies to build their infrastructure. Joy Dogood, NTD News.
And we'll end today's episode on a light note with Winnie the Pooh. The Chinese Communist Party's mouthpiece People's Daily published this video on Tuesday on its Twitter account. It's relevant to note here that Twitter is censored in China, so this post would be aimed at people outside China. And the post simply says, "Attention, a cute monster is wandering around to capture your heart." Winnie the Pooh is one of the so-called sensitive terms in China, as it refers to the CCP's head, Xi Jinping. In China, the popular bear cannot be called Winnie the Pooh. Instead, he goes by another name. They call him Pooh Pooh Bear. The Chinese state media's post surprised some netizens. A range of comments appeared online. Some say it's cute and lovely, and others tried to guess the reason for the post. One Chinese netizen focused on the word monster, asking if the post is making reference to Xi Jinping as a monster. Another said, ironically, this kid is giving a hint that he has been persecuted by the CCP. And that's all for today's China in Focus. But before you go, we have a short announcement. We will not have an episode of China in Focus tomorrow, but we will be back to our regular programming on Friday. Happy Thanksgiving.